Welcome to Flow Speak Studio, where English flows naturally. Let's start speaking with confidence.
Okay, let me ask you something before we even introduce the episode. Have you ever noticed how the most comforting moments of your day are usually very small? I'm talking about that first sip of coffee in the morning, or sitting down to eat something simple after a long day, or even choosing what you're going to cook while you're tired but hungry. Those moments feel ordinary, but emotionally, they're powerful.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that many people can live those moments in English, but they don't know how to talk about them. They freeze when someone asks, "What did you have for breakfast?" Or "What kind of coffee do you like?" Or "What food makes you feel comfortable?" Suddenly, something very familiar feels difficult just because it's in English.
Exactly. And that's why today's episode matters more than it seems. Because food, coffee, and daily comforts aren't just vocabulary topics. They're emotional topics. They're human topics. They're how we connect with people at work, with friends, while traveling, or even during small talk with strangers.
So, in this episode, we're not going to teach food words like a textbook. We're going to talk about how food fits into real life, how we actually talk about it, how comfort shows up in everyday conversations, and most importantly, how using English in these small, cozy topics helps you stop translating and start thinking naturally.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Alex.
And today, we're talking about food, coffee, and daily comforts. Not perfectly, not academically, but honestly. If you've ever felt like English disappears when conversations become casual, this episode is for you. Let's begin. You know, when I think about food and comfort, the first thing that comes to my mind isn't a fancy restaurant or a special meal. It's actually very simple moments, like standing in my kitchen early in the morning, still half asleep, waiting for the coffee to be ready. That moment feels quiet, safe, almost private. And what's interesting is those moments are usually the easiest to live, but surprisingly hard to describe in English for many learners. I remember when I was learning another language, I could talk about big ideas, work, plans, but when someone asked me, "What do you usually eat in the morning?" my mind just stopped. Because comfort isn't something we memorize, it's something we feel.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. Food conversations feel simple, but they're deeply connected to routine, memory, and emotion. And when you're speaking in a second language, those emotional topics can feel more vulnerable. For example, I've noticed that when people talk about coffee, they're not really talking about coffee. They're talking about how they start their day, about needing time before speaking, about comfort or stress or even control. But learners often think, "Oh, I don't know enough words for this," when in reality, they just don't feel confident talking about everyday things.
Exactly. And daily comforts are usually tied to repetition. You eat similar things, you drink the same coffee, you have small rituals that don't change much. So when someone asks you in English, "What do you like to eat when you're tired?" or "What's your comfort food?" it feels strange because suddenly something very personal becomes something you need to explain slowly in another language. That's where people start overthinking.
And overthinking kills natural speech. I've seen people panic over sentences like, "I usually have toast and coffee." They think, "Is this too simple? Is this correct? Should I say something more interesting?" But real conversations don't need to be impressive, they need to be real. In fact, native speakers talk about food in a very repetitive, relaxed way. They reuse the same expressions all the time.
Yes, and food is one of the safest conversation topics socially. You can talk about it at work, while traveling, with strangers, even in awkward silences. But learners sometimes avoid it because they think it's basic English. And that's a mistake, because basic English is where fluency starts. If you can talk naturally about what you eat, what you drink, and what makes you feel comfortable, you're already building real conversational confidence.
I agree. And there's another layer here. Daily comfort often changes depending on your mood. Some days you want something warm, some days something quick. Some days you just want the same thing again because you don't want to think. Talking about that in English helps you practice emotional vocabulary without pressure. For example, saying things like, I just wanted something simple today, or I didn't feel like cooking. Those sentences sound small, but they're powerful because they reflect real life.
And they're sentences people use all the time. I think one reason this topic is so important is because food conversations usually happen when people are relaxed, during lunch breaks, coffee breaks, dinner with friends. So if you can feel comfortable speaking English there, your brain starts associating English with calm, not stress. And that's a huge shift.
Absolutely. Instead of English being performance mode, it becomes life mode. And once that happens, learners stop trying to translate perfect sentences. They start sharing experiences. They might say something simple like, I always drink coffee before I feel human. And suddenly, that's connection.
And that's what this episode is really about. Not food lists, not coffee types, but how everyday comforts help your English feel human.
You know, when people think about speaking English, they often imagine big conversations, job interviews, presentations, travel emergencies. But the real struggle usually shows up in very small moments, like standing in line with a coffee in your hand and someone casually asks, So, what do you usually have for breakfast? That question looks easy, but inside, the mind starts racing.
Yes, and that inner dialogue can be exhausting. You're not thinking about food anymore. You're thinking, is this sentence too simple? Am I boring? Do I sound like a child? And suddenly, instead of enjoying the moment, you're trapped inside your head. I've heard many learners say, I know the words, but I don't know how to say it naturally.
Exactly. And what's really happening is not a vocabulary problem, it's an emotional one. People feel pressure to perform in English. They think every sentence needs to prove something. So when the topic is daily comfort, like food or coffee, the brain says, this is too personal, or this is too basic to say out loud. Which is ironic because native speakers talk about these things all the time without thinking.
And there's also fear of judgment, not just about English, but about habits. Someone might think, my breakfast is not healthy, or I eat the same thing every day, or I don't cook much. So now the fear doubles. You're exposed linguistically and personally. That combination makes people freeze.
Yes. I remember a learner telling me, when someone asks me about food in English, I want to disappear because their inner voice says, you don't have an interesting answer. You should say something better. You're wasting this conversation. And that voice is incredibly loud.
It is, and that voice often comes from comparison. We hear others speak fluently, joking, sounding relaxed, and we think, why can't I sound like that? But what we forget is that fluency isn't about complexity, it's about comfort. If you don't feel comfortable, even simple words feel heavy.
And comfort doesn't come from studying more phrases. It comes from allowing yourself to be ordinary in English. To say things like, I usually eat whatever is easy, or I'm not really a breakfast person. Those sentences don't need decoration. They just need honesty.
And there's another inner struggle, silence. Sometimes after answering, people feel the silence and think, that's it? Was that enough? So they rush, they add extra words, they over-explain. But silence in conversations about food or comfort is normal. People are eating, drinking, thinking. Not every moment needs to be filled.
That's such an important point. Learners often feel responsible for keeping the conversation alive. But real conversations breathe, they pause, they slow down. When you allow that, your English starts to feel less like a test and more like a shared space.
And that's the emotional shift we want. From, am I saying this right? To, this is just me talking. Because once that inner pressure softens, your words come out more naturally, even if they're simple.
Exactly.
And in the next part, we'll talk about how these everyday comfort topics show up in real life, at work, while traveling, with friends, and how you can use them without overthinking.
Now let's move into how this actually shows up in real life. Because food, coffee, and daily comforts are not small talk topics. They're connection tools. They appear everywhere, at work, with friends, while traveling, even in moments when you least expect them. And when you start seeing them this way, the pressure slowly disappears.
Exactly. Let's start with work, because this is where many learners feel the most tension. At work, food conversations usually happen in very casual moments, before a meeting, during a break, in a chat message like, "Did you already have lunch?" You're not being tested, people are just checking in. But learners often overthink and feel like they need a professional answer.
Yes, and the truth is, simple is professional. Saying something like, I usually keep lunch pretty light, especially on busy days, sounds natural and calm. You're not giving your life story. You're sharing just enough to be human. And that's usually all the other person wanted.
And there's something interesting that happens when you answer comfortably. It invites the other person to relax too. If you say, I'm not very fancy with food, I just like things that feel easy, you open space for connection. Now it's not about English anymore, it's about shared habits.
Now let's talk about friendships and social life. Food and coffee are emotional topics. They're tied to comfort, routines, and memories. When someone asks, what do you usually drink in the morning? They're often asking, what does your day feel like? So answering honestly helps build closeness.
And this is where learners sometimes try to impress. They think, I should say something interesting. But connection doesn't come from interesting answers, it comes from real ones. Saying, I usually have the same coffee every day. It's my little routine, can feel surprisingly warm. Because routines are relatable.
Travel is another big one. When you're traveling, food becomes a shared experience very quickly. You talk to hotel staff, other travelers, locals. Questions like, did you like the food here? Or what do you usually eat back home come up naturally. And you don't need perfect English to answer these.
Exactly. Travel conversations are forgiving. You can say, I miss simple food from home. It makes me feel comfortable. And people understand immediately. Emotion carries meaning more than perfect grammar.
And then there's personal growth. Talking about daily comforts in English helps you feel at home in the language. When you can describe what makes you feel calm, your coffee, your favorite meal, your quiet moments, English stops feeling foreign. It becomes part of your inner world.
That's such an important shift. Because when English enters your daily routines, it stops being an activity. It becomes a language you live in, not one you perform. And food and comfort are the easiest doors into that space.
So if you're listening and thinking, I never talk about these things in English, that's actually an opportunity. Start small, start honest, start comfortable. Because comfort creates confidence, not the other way around.
And in the next block, we'll slow down even more and focus on key phrases you can use in these moments. Phrases that sound natural, relaxed, and human.
Before we get into the phrases, I want to slow this moment down a little. Because these phrases aren't about sounding impressive, they're about sounding comfortable. Food, coffee, and daily comforts are emotional topics. They live in our routines, our memories, our sense of safety. So the way we talk about them in English should feel gentle, relaxed, and real. These are phrases you can use without pressure, at work, with friends, while traveling, or even just talking about your day.
Let's start with a very natural one. I usually keep it pretty simple. I usually keep it pretty simple. This phrase means you don't overcomplicate things. You're talking about food, routines, or habits in a relaxed way. For example, I usually keep it pretty simple in the mornings, just coffee and something light. Or, when it comes to food, I keep it pretty simple. I use this phrase a lot when I don't want to explain too much. It feels calm. It sets a boundary without sounding closed.
I remember saying this once at work during a lunch conversation, and it instantly made the conversation easier. No pressure to explain, no pressure to impress.
This next one is important because it connects habits to emotions. It's kind of my comfort thing. It's kind of my comfort thing. This means something brings you emotional ease or familiarity. For example, having coffee in the morning is kind of my comfort thing. Or, that meal reminds me of home. It's my comfort thing. When I first started using this phrase, I noticed people responded emotionally, not linguistically. They didn't correct me, they connected.
Here's another phrase that sounds very natural in daily conversation. It helps me ease into the day. It helps me ease into the day. This means something helps you start your day slowly and calmly. For example, my morning coffee helps me ease into the day. Or I don't like rushing. I need something that helps me ease into the day. I love this phrase because it shows self-awareness. It sounds reflective, not rehearsed.
Let's move to something people use a lot in social settings. I'm more of a person. You can adapt this to almost anything. For example, I'm more of a coffee person than a tea person. I'm more of a breakfast person. I'm more of a simple food person. This phrase is soft. It doesn't sound extreme. It invites conversation instead of ending it.
Now, this next phrase is useful when you want to be honest without explaining everything. It just works for me. It just works for me. For example, I've tried different breakfasts, but this one just works for me. Or I don't change my routine much. It just works for me. Actively, I use this phrase because it gave me permission to stop justifying my habits, and that confidence comes through in your voice.
Here's one that sounds very human. It's nothing fancy, but I enjoy it. It's nothing fancy, but I enjoy it. For example, my lunch is nothing fancy, but I enjoy it. Or, it's a simple routine, nothing fancy, but I enjoy it. I love this phrase because it removes comparison. You're not competing, you're just sharing.
This next one is great for travel or social conversations. I'm used to. For example, I'm used to eating earlier in the day. I'm used to lighter meals. I'm used to having coffee at home. This phrase explains your habits without saying they're better or worse. It feels neutral and respectful.
Now let's talk about routine. It's part of my daily rhythm. It's part of my daily rhythm. For example, cooking in the evening is part of my daily rhythm. Or, that quiet coffee moment is part of my daily rhythm. This phrase sounds poetic, but it's very natural. It shows awareness of your life flow.
Here's one that learners often avoid, but it's very common. It depends on the day. It depends on the day. For example, what do you eat for breakfast? It depends on the day. I love this phrase because it removes pressure to be consistent. It reflects real life.
Let's end with one that brings everything together. It makes my day feel better. It makes my day feel better. For example, that first coffee makes my day feel better. Or, cooking something warm makes my day feel better. This phrase is simple, emotional, and deeply human, and that's why it works.
These phrases aren't about vocabulary. They're about comfort, rhythm, and honesty. When you use them, English stops being a performance and starts feeling like a place you belong.
Before we finish today, I want to take a moment to sit with everything we talked about, not to summarize it quickly, but to feel it. We talked about food, coffee, small comforts, things that seem simple on the surface. But when you really think about it, these are the moments that shape our days. They're the quiet anchors, the routines that tell our nervous system, you're okay, you're safe, you're here. And the same thing happens with English. English doesn't grow only in big conversations or perfect sentences. It grows in small, calm moments. When you talk about what you eat, how you start your day, what makes you feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of learners don't realize. We often believe English needs to be intense to be effective.
Like every conversation has to push us, challenge us, or make us uncomfortable. But real progress doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like saying, I usually keep it pretty simple, and feeling relaxed while saying it. Those moments matter. They build trust, not just with other people, but with yourself.
If you're listening right now and thinking, I don't speak a lot of English during the day, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need more pressure, you need more presence. Presence with your routines, presence with your habits, presence with the language you already know. When you describe your coffee, your food, your daily comforts in English, even quietly, even imperfectly, you're training your brain to live in the language, not visit it.
And that changes everything. Because when English becomes part of your daily rhythm, it stops feeling like a test. It becomes something familiar, something personal, something that belongs to your life, not just your goals. You don't need to sound impressive. You don't need new words every day. You just need consistency in the small moments.
So, as we close this episode, here's a simple invitation, not a task, not homework. The next time you drink coffee, eat a meal, or sit in a quiet, comfortable moment, try describing it in English. Just one sentence, no pressure, no correction. Let English sit with you there.
And remember, fluency isn't built by forcing yourself forward. It's built by allowing yourself to stay. Stay in the moment. Stay with your voice. Stay with your imperfect, real English.
Thank you for being here with us, for listening, for slowing down. We'll be right here in the next episode, continuing this journey one calm conversation at a time. Until then, take care of yourself and let your English flow.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment down below.